October 23, 1944. The Philippine Sea near Palawan Island. Commander David McClintock peers through the periscope of USS Darter as dawn breaks over calm waters. And what he sees makes his heart race with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. Ships. Dozens of ships stretching across the horizon in a formation. So massive, it seems to fill the entire sea. Japanese warships steaming east in perfectly ordered columns, including battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. A fleet so powerful, it represents Japan's last hope for stopping the American advance toward Tokyo. McClintock has stumbled onto the Japanese center force under Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, and he's about to trigger the largest naval battle in human history. This moment has been coming since American forces landed on Leyte Island in the Philippines 3 days earlier on October 20th, 1944. General Douglas MacArthur waded ashore fulfilling his promise to return to the Philippines after being forced to evacuate in 1942. And that return threatens everything Japan has left. The Philippines sit astride Japan's supply lines to the resource-rich territories of Southeast Asia, including the oil fields of Borneo and the Dutch East Indies, that fuel Japan's war machine. If America takes the Philippines, then Japan loses access to oil, rubber, tin, and other critical resources, which means the war is effectively over because Japan's military cannot function without these resources flowing north to the home islands. The Japanese High Command understands this perfectly, which is why they've devised Operation Sho-Go, meaning victory operation, though the name is more wishful thinking than realistic assessment. The plan calls for using every available ship in the combined fleet to destroy the American invasion force at Leyte Gulf through a complex coordinated attack from multiple directions. It's desperate and risky, with no guarantee of success. But doing nothing guarantees defeat, so they're gambling everything on this one. Massive naval operation that will either save the Philippines or destroy what remains of Japan's navy in the attempt. Admiral Soemu Toyoda commands the combined fleet from Tokyo, and he's designed Sho-Go as a multi-pronged attack that relies heavily on deception and timing. The plan calls for Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa's northern force built around Japan's 4 remaining aircraft carriers to sail south from Japan and lure the American carriers away from Leyte Gulf by presenting themselves as tempting targets. These carriers have almost no aircraft aboard because Japan has lost most of its trained carrier pilots at battles like Philippine Sea. But Toyota is betting that American commanders won't. No, the carriers are nearly empty and will chase them anyway because carriers represent such valuable targets, while the American carriers chase Ozawa's decoy force to the north. 2 powerful surface forces will converge on Leyte Gulf from the west through the Philippine island chains. Kurita's center force is the main striking arm with 5 battleships, including the super battleships Yamato and Musashi, along with 10 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 15 destroyers. This massive force will transit the Sibuyan Sea and San Bernardino Strait before turning south to hit the invasion beaches from the north. Meanwhile, Vice Admiral Shoshi Nishimura's southern force, with 2 battleships and supporting ships, will come through Surigao Strait from the south, timing their arrival to coincide with Kurita's attack, so American forces face simultaneous assaults from multiple directions. The plan looks elegant on paper with coordinated attacks, deceptive maneuvers, and overwhelming force applied at the critical point. But it depends on perfect timing and communication between forces that will be hundreds of miles apart, operating under radio silence to avoid detection. It also depends on the Americans reacting exactly as predicted by taking the bait and chasing the carrier decoy force, which is asking a lot considering that American intelligence has been reading Japanese naval codes for years and might see through the deception. But Toyota has no better options available because Japan's strategic situation is so desperate that even a risky plan is better than no plan at all. Commander McClintock aboard. Darter watches Kurita's center force through his periscope and quickly realizes he's looking at the most powerful Japanese surface force assembled since Midway over 2 years ago. He counts the ships and identifies the types before submerging to send contact reports that will alert every American unit in the theater that a major Japanese fleet is approaching the Philippines. His partner submarine, USS Dace, under Commander Bladen Claggett, is nearby, and both submarines begin tracking the Japanese formation while radioing its position, course, speed, and composition to Admiral William Halsey, commanding 3rd Fleet, and Admiral Thomas Kincaid, commanding 7th Fleet, supporting the Leyte invasion. The Japanese ships are steaming in predictable formation, making regular zigzags to complicate submarine attacks. But McClintock and Claggett are experienced submarine commanders who know how to calculate firing solutions against zigzagging targets. They maneuver their submarines into attack positions as darkness falls on October 23rd. And in the early morning hours of October 24th, they launch torpedo spreads at the heavy cruisers leading Kurita's formation. The torpedoes hit with devastating effect as Darter's torpedoes slam into the heavy cruiser Otago, which happens to be Kurita's flagship, while Dace's torpedoes hit the heavy cruiser Maya. Both cruisers explode and sink rapidly, with Otago taking over 300 men down, including most of Kurita's staff. While Maya sinks with all hands lost, Kurita survives by swimming to a destroyer that rescues him from the water. But he's lost his flagship, his staff, and his communications equipment in the first hours of the operation, which creates command and control problems that will plague him throughout the coming battle. A 3rd heavy cruiser Takao is badly damaged by Darter's torpedoes and must turn back toward Brunei, escorted by destroyers, which reduces Kurita's force before he's even engaged American surface ships. The submarine attacks prove that American forces know he's coming and are ready to fight, which should concern Kurita greatly, but he continues steaming toward his objective because orders are orders, and that the operation must proceed regardless of losses. October 24 dawns clear and bright, which is good weather for flying, but bad weather for Japanese ships trying to cross the Sibuyan Sea without air cover. American search planes from 3rd Fleet's carriers locate Kurita's center, force early in the morning, and Admiral Halsey orders massive airstrikes against the Japanese formation. Wave after wave of American aircraft attack throughout the day, carrying bombs, torpedoes, and rockets against ships that can only defend themselves with anti-aircraft fire because Japan no longer has the carrier aircraft to provide combat air patrol over surface forces. The American pilots focus on the super battleship Musashi because sinking the world's 2nd largest battleship would be a tremendous achievement and bragging rights. Forever, Musashi fights back with everything she has, including dozens of anti-aircraft guns throwing up walls of steel against incoming aircraft. But she's facing hundreds of attacking planes that coordinate their attacks from multiple directions to overwhelm her defenses. The first torpedo hits early in the morning and starts flooding in the bow. Then more torpedoes slam into her sides as bomb hits rain down on her armored deck. The damage accumulates slowly throughout the day because Musashi is incredibly tough with massive armor, plating, and extensive compartmentalization that keeps her afloat despite terrible damage. But eventually, even the super battleship reaches her limits as flooding increases, power systems fail, and the list becomes unmanageable. By late afternoon, Musashi has taken an estimated 19 torpedo hits and 17 bomb hits, which is more punishment than any battleship has ever endured. And she's visibly dying as her bow sinks lower in the water while the list increases to dangerous angles. Kurita orders her abandoned, and the crew evacuates, while American aircraft continue attacking the sinking giant until she finally capsizes and sinks around 1935. Ours taking over 1,000 crew members with her. The super battleship that was supposed to be unsinkable has been destroyed by carrier aircraft, just like her sister ship Yamato will be 6 months later, proving once again that battleships cannot survive without air cover in modern naval warfare. Kurita's center force has taken severe punishment throughout the day, with Musashi sunk, other battleships damaged, and multiple cruisers hit by bombs and torpedoes. The constant air attacks have disrupted his formation, slowed his advance, and caused casualties across his fleet. As evening approaches, he makes a controversial decision to temporarily reverse course westward away from San Bernardino Strait while he assesses damage and reorganizes his scattered forces. This reversal will have enormous consequences because American reconnaissance aircraft spot the Japanese ships heading west and report to Halsey that Kurita appears to be retreating from the battle. Halsey receives these reports late in the afternoon just as his search planes locate Ozawa's northern force with its 4 aircraft carriers steaming south off Cape Ngago. This is exactly what Ozawa intended, because his mission is to lure the American carriers away from Leyte Gulf, so Kurita's surface ships can attack the invasion force unopposed. Halsey faces a critical decision that will determine the battle's outcome and be debated by historians for decades afterward. He can keep his carriers near San Bernardino Strait to guard against Kurita's force breaking through to attack the invasion beaches, or he can take his carriers north to destroy Ozawa's carriers, which represent the last operational Japanese carriers, and thus highly valuable targets. Halsey is an aggressive commander whose instinct is to attack rather than defend, and the prospect of sinking 4 Japanese carriers is enormously tempting because carriers are the most valuable targets in naval warfare, and destroying them would eliminate Japan's carrier capability forever. The reconnaissance reports saying Kurita is retreating westward reinforce Halsey's belief that the center force has been beaten and is no longer a threat to the invasion force. He decides to take his entire Third Fleet north to attack Ozawa's carriers, leaving San Bernardino Strait completely unguarded because he believes Kurita won't come through, and even if he does this, 7th Fleet can handle any breakthrough. This decision will be called Halsey's mistake by critics who argue he should have left a powerful surface force to guard San Bernardino Strait while taking only his carriers north to attack Ozawa. Halsey believes concentrated force is better than divided force, and he wants overwhelming power available to destroy the Japanese carriers quickly and completely. He orders all his battleships, cruisers, carriers, and destroyers to head north at high speed, which leaves San Bernardino Strait wide open for Kurita to transit if the Japanese admiral reverses course again and continues toward his objective. Meanwhile, far to the south, Vice Admiral Nishimura's southern force approaches Surigao Strait in the darkness of October 24th to 25th, steaming in column formation with his 2 battleships Yamashiro and Fuso, leading followed by a heavy cruiser and 4 destroyers. Nishimura knows he's heading into danger, because Surigao Strait is a confined waterway perfect for defensive operations where American forces can concentrate overwhelming firepower against ships forced to advance in narrow columns. But his orders require him to transit the strait and attack the invasion force at dawn, so he continues forward despite the risks because Japanese naval culture values aggressive action and following orders over cautious preservation of forces. Admiral Jesse Oldendorf commands the 7th Fleet forces guarding Surigao Strait, and he's prepared a textbook defensive ambush using every advantage the geography provides. He positions his 6 old battleships across the northern exit of the strait in a battle line perpendicular to the Japanese approach, which means his ships can bring all their guns to bear on the Japanese column, while the Japanese ships can only fire their forward turrets. He stations cruisers on both flanks of the strait to deliver crossfire, and he positions destroyers in the strait itself to launch torpedo attacks against the Japanese column as it advances. Finally, he deploys PT boats at the southern entrance to spot the Japanese force and launch harassing attacks that will disrupt their formation. This is called crossing. The T in naval tactics, where one fleet positions itself perpendicular to an enemy column so that all your ships can fire at the enemy, while only the lead enemy ships can return fire, creating overwhelming firepower advantage. It's the dream scenario for any naval commander, and hasn't been achieved in battle since the Russo-Japanese War 40 years earlier. Oldendorf has set the perfect trap, and Nishimura is steaming straight into it because he has no choice and probably knows he's doomed, but continues anyway out of duty and honor. The PT boats make contact with Nishimura's force around midnight and launch torpedoes that don't hit anything but alert Oldendorf that the Japanese are coming. American destroyers race down the strait and launch massed torpedo attacks from both sides, catching the Japanese column in crossfire that devastates the formation. The battleship Fuso is hit by torpedoes that break her in half with both sections, burning and sinking while survivors scramble into the water. Multiple destroyers are hit and sunk or crippled, and Nishimura's formation disintegrates under the ferocious destroyer attacks before his ships even reach the main American battle line. Nishimura continues forward with his surviving ships, including his flagship Yamashiro, because retreat would be dishonorable and his mission requires him to break through to Leyte Gulf, regardless of cost. Around 0350 hours, his battered force comes within range of Oldendorf's battleships, and the old dreadnoughts open fire with their main batteries, hurling 14-inch and 16-inch shells down the strait in a devastating barrage that overwhelms the Japanese ships. Yamashiro takes multiple hits that start fires and cause flooding, while American cruisers add their 8-inch guns to the barrage, creating a crossfire that no ship can survive. Yamashiro capsizes and sinks around 420 hours, taking Admiral Nishimura and most of his crew down with her, and the few surviving Japanese ships retreat southward in complete defeat. The Battle of Surigao Strait is over after less than an hour of actual combat, and it's been a one-sided slaughter, where American forces destroyed an entire Japanese force while suffering only minimal damage to a few destroyers. It's also the last time battleships will ever fight battleships in history, because after this night, the battleship era is truly finished, with carriers and aircraft replacing big gunships as the dominant naval weapons. While Nishimura's force dies in Surigao Strait, Kurita's center force reverses course again during the night and heads back east towards San Bernardino Strait, having reorganized his ships and decided to continue the mission despite the day's losses and damage. He transits the strait in darkness and emerges into the Philippine Sea around 0300 hours on October 25th, turning south along the coast of Samar Island toward Leyte Gulf. His force still includes the super battleship Yamato, 3 other battleships, 6 heavy cruisers and destroyers, which represents enormous firepower that can devastate the thin-skinned amphibious ships and transports in Leyte Gulf if he reaches them. But Kurita doesn't know that Halsey has taken every 3rd Fleet carrier north to attack Ozawa, which means San Bernardino Strait is unguarded and nothing heavy stands between Kurita's battleships and the invasion beaches, except for 3 groups of escort carriers that were providing air support for the troops ashore. These escort carriers, called Taffy 1, Taffy 2, and Taffy 3, are small, slow carriers built on merchant ship hulls, designed for anti-submarine warfare and ground support rather than fleet actions against battleships. Each group has 6 escort carriers with destroyer escorts for protection. But these are light ships with thin armor and small guns that cannot possibly fight battleships in surface combat and survive. Admiral Clifton Sprague commands Taffy 3, which is the northernmost carrier group and thus closest to Kurita's approaching force. At dawn on October 25th, one of his pilots spots the Japanese ships and radios a shocked report that enemy battleships and cruisers are approaching from the north, just 20 miles away. Sprague can hardly believe it because intelligence said the Japanese fleet was beaten and retreating, but his radar confirms the report, showing multiple large contacts closing at high speed. He immediately realizes his carriers are in mortal danger because they can't outrun battleships and their thin hulls, won't survive battleship shells. Sprague orders his carriers to head east at flank speed while launching every available aircraft, armed with whatever ordnance is available, whether appropriate for attacking battleships or not. He orders his destroyers and destroyer escorts to attack the Japanese force with torpedoes and guns in what amounts to suicide missions because destroyers can't survive against battleships but might delay them long enough for the carriers to escape. He starts broadcasting urgent calls for help to Halsey and Kincaid, telling them that his carriers are under attack by Japanese battleships and need immediate support. But Halsey is hundreds of miles north chasing. Ozawa and Kincaid's battleships are in Surigao Strait low on ammunition after the night battle. The Japanese ships open fire with armor-piercing shells designed to penetrate battleship armor, which means they tend to pass completely through the thin-hulled escort carriers without exploding because the fuses don't trigger on such light targets. This quirk of shell design saves some carriers from being destroyed immediately, but the massive 18-inch shells from Yamato and smaller shells from other ships still cause terrible damage as near misses throw up huge geysers of water that drench carrier decks, while direct hits that do explode tear enormous holes in hulls. Superstructures. The American destroyers charge the Japanese battleships in attacks that are either incredibly brave or completely insane, depending on your perspective. Ships like USS Johnston, USS Hull, and USS Samuel B. Roberts race toward enemy battleships at full speed, launching torpedoes and firing their 5-inch guns at armored giants that outweigh them 10-1. The destroyers are torn apart by Japanese gunfire, with Johnston taking dozens of hits that destroy her bridge, knock out her guns, and start fires throughout the ship, before she finally sinks, taking most of her crew, including her Captain Commander Ernest Evans, who wins a posthumous Medal of Honor for his heroic and ultimately suicidal attack. Destroyer attacks do accomplish their mission by forcing Japanese ships to maneuver, to avoid torpedoes, which disrupts their formation and slows their pursuit of the carriers. Meanwhile, Sprague's aircraft attack continuously with bombs, torpedoes, rockets, and even strafing runs when they run out of ordnance, just making runs at Japanese ships to keep them distracted and disrupted. The aircraft aren't carrying armor-piercing bombs needed to seriously damage battleships, but they score hits on cruisers and destroyers that cause damage and casualties, while the constant attacks keep Japanese ships maneuvering and distracted rather than focusing entirely on chasing the carriers. The Battle of Samar becomes a chaotic running fight where American carriers race eastward trailing smoke, while Japanese battleships chase them, firing continuously and getting closer with each salvo. One carrier, USS Gambier Bay, is hit repeatedly and slows as flooding and damage accumulate until she capsizes and sinks, around 0907 hours, becoming the only American carrier sunk by surface gunfire in the war. 2 of Sprague's destroyers are sunk, and others badly damaged, while his other carriers take hits and damage but remain afloat and operational despite punishment that would have sunk larger warships. Then at 0925 hours, something remarkable happens as Kurita orders his ships to break off the attack and head north away from the carriers. His ships turn away from an enemy they've been pursuing for over 2 hours, an enemy they're on the verge of destroying completely, and Kurita orders them to withdraw when victory is within grasp. The reasons for this decision remain debated because Kurita never fully explained his thinking, but he appears to have believed the escort carriers were fleet carriers, which would indicate that Halsey's main force was nearby and about to trap him. He also knew the American aircraft. Attacks were coming from multiple directions, suggesting more carriers were operating in the area than just Sprague's group. Kurita was also exhausted from 3 days of continuous operations, traumatized from swimming for his life when his flagship sank, and operating without proper staff support to help him process information and make decisions. His ships were scattered after the chaotic battle and low on ammunition after hours of continuous firing, and he had no idea what Japanese forces were still operating because communications had broken down. In this fog of war and exhaustion, he made the decision to withdraw and head back towards San Bernardino Strait, abandoning the mission just when it might have succeeded in reaching the invasion beaches and causing terrible destruction. Among the vulnerable transports and amphibious ships, Sprague's carriers have been saved by what's called the miracle off Samar, where destroyer attacks, continuous airstrikes, smoke screens, rain squalls, and Kurita's confusion combined to save ships that should have been destroyed. Taffy 3 lost 1 carrier and 2 destroyers, with heavy damage to other ships and hundreds of casualties. But the Japanese fleet withdrew before completing the destruction, which means the invasion force at Leyte Gulf remains intact and the operation continues. It's one of the most remarkable escapes in naval history, where the weakest American ships survived an encounter with the most powerful Japanese ships through sheer determination, creative tactics, and enemy mistakes. While Kurita fights Taffy 3 off Samar, hundreds of miles to the north, Halsey's Third Fleet has found Ozawa's northern force and begins destroying the decoy carriers that lured them away from Leyte Gulf. American carrier aircraft attack throughout October 25th, sinking all 4 Japanese carriers along with destroyers and a light cruiser. Ozawa's mission is accomplished because he successfully decoyed the American carriers away from Leyte Gulf, but the cost is his entire force destroyed with thousands of casualties. The Japanese carriers go down with almost no aircraft aboard because Japan no longer has enough trained pilots to equip them, making these carriers expensive decoys rather than actual combat units. Halsey receives increasingly desperate messages from Sprague during the morning battle off Samar, begging for help against Kurita's battleships, and he finally realizes he's been decoyed away from the main action. He turns his fleet south at high speed, trying to intercept Kurita's force before it reaches the invasion beaches. But he's too far away to arrive in time to help Taffy 3. His fast battleships under Admiral Willis Lee are steaming south, hoping to catch Kurita's ships as they retreat through San Bernardino Strait. But Kurita manages to transit the strait and escape before Lee arrives. So the opportunity for a climactic battleship versus battleship action never materializes. The Battle of Leyte Gulf ends on October 26th, after 4 days of continuous fighting across an area larger than France, making it the largest naval battle in history by any measure, including number of ships engaged, tonnage involved, and area covered. The Japanese lose 4 aircraft carriers, 3 battleships including the super battleship Musashi, 10 cruisers, and 9 destroyers along with hundreds of aircraft and over 10,000 sailors killed. The Americans lose 1 light carrier, 2 escort carriers, 2 destroyers, and 1 destroyer escort with approximately 3,000 casualties. The exchange ratio is overwhelmingly in America's favor, showing that Japanese naval power is finished as an effective fighting force. Japan's defeat at Leyte Gulf means the Philippines will fall to American control, which cuts Japan's access to oil and resources from Southeast Asia and dooms the home islands to eventual starvation and collapse. The Japanese Navy ceases to exist as a strategic force after Leyte Gulf, with only scattered ships remaining that can't operate effectively due to fuel shortages and lack of trained crews. Japan will never again mount a major naval operation and will spend this rest of the war defending the home islands against an inevitable American invasion. The Battle of Leyte Gulf also marks the first large-scale use of kamikaze attacks as organized suicide missions, when Japanese aircraft deliberately crash into American ships carrying bombs. 1 escort carrier, USS St. Lo, is sunk by a kamikaze strike during the battle, and many other ships are damaged by these attacks that will become increasingly common and devastating as Japan's situation becomes more desperate. The kamikazes represent Japan's final tactical innovation in the war, turning pilots into guided missiles in a desperate attempt to inflict casualties that might make America reconsider invading the home islands. America, the victory at Leyte Gulf, secures the Philippines and provides bases for the final push toward Japan, including airfields for B-29 bombers and harbors for the invasion fleets that will assault Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The Philippines campaign will continue for months as Japanese forces retreat into the mountains and fight delaying actions. But the naval battle determined the outcome by eliminating Japan's ability to reinforce or resupply their ground forces. MacArthur's return to the Philippines is secured by the Navy's victory at Leyte Gulf. The battle produces numerous heroes and controversial decisions that historians debate decades later. Clifton Sprague's defense of Taffy 3 against overwhelming odds becomes legendary, as does Ernest Evans' suicidal destroyer attack that helped save the carriers. Halsey's decision to chase the decoy carriers north, leaving San Bernardino Strait unguarded, remains controversial, with critics arguing he fell for an obvious trap, while defenders argue he destroyed the Japanese carrier force and nearly caught Kurita anyway. Kurita's decision to withdraw when victory was within reach is analyzed and debated, with some calling it a failure of nerve, while others argue he made a rational decision based on incomplete information in a chaotic situation. The Battle of Leyte Gulf demonstrates the decisive importance of intelligence in modern warfare because American code-breaking provided warning of the Japanese operation and allowed defensive preparations. It shows the vulnerability of surface ships without air cover because Musashi and other Japanese ships were destroyed by aircraft they couldn't defend against. It proves that carrier aviation has replaced battleship gunnery as the dominant form of naval combat, even though Surigao Strait gave battleships one final moment of glory. And it shows that even desperate plans can partially succeed through deception and aggressive action. Even when the strategic situation is hopeless. Today, the waters around Leyte Gulf and Samar are grave sites for thousands of sailors from both sides who died in the largest naval battle ever fought. The wrecks of Musashi, Yamashiro, Fuso, and numerous other ships rest on the seafloor as memorials to the men who fought and died there. Veterans from both nations have met at reunions to share memories and honor fallen comrades, finding common ground as warriors who respect each other's courage, even as former enemies. This is the Battle of Leyte Gulf, October 23rd to 26, 1944, when over 300 ships fought across an ocean battlefield that covered thousands of square miles. When American forces destroyed Japanese naval power forever and secured the Philippines for MacArthur's return. When escort carriers fought battleships and survived through courage and luck. When the largest naval battle in history decided the fate of the Pacific War. Remember the ships? Remember the sailors? Remember the battle that ended Japan's navy and brought the war one step closer to its conclusion.